You feel it before you can name it, that low hum of unease under your skin, the tightness in your chest that doesn't go away, even on your best days, the sensation that something isn't quite right with the world, or with you, but no one around you seems to notice. You try to brush it off. Maybe it's stress, maybe you just need more sleep, maybe you're overthinking things again, but no matter what you do, that pressure keeps building. It's not anxiety, it's not burnout, it's not just a phase. It's your memory returning, not the kind you can explain or point to in a photo album. No, this memory is older, deeper, buried in the marrow of your bones. It doesn't come in words, it comes in sensations, flashes, gut feelings that have no logic, but feel more real than anything you've been told is true. You aren't falling apart. You're remembering something your mind was never supposed to forget. From the moment you were born, the world wrapped you in layers, stories, labels, expectations. You learned who you were allowed to be, what you were allowed to feel, how much of your truth was acceptable. You learned how to survive by forgetting, and it worked for a while. But now something is shifting. You wake up and feel like the air has changed. You hear a song from years ago and feel a tear rise for no reason. You catch your reflection in the mirror, and for a split second, you don't recognize the person staring back. Not because you've changed, but because a part of you is finally waking up. And with that awakening comes the discomfort, the fear, the quiet inner chaos that no one prepared you for. But what if I told you that this fear is not the enemy? What if I told you that the fear you feel right now is actually the moment your soul says, I remember? You're not afraid. You're recognizing there's something deeply sacred happening inside of you. But because no one ever told you how awakening actually feels, you think something's wrong. You think you're breaking down. You think you've lost your direction. But the truth is, the direction you used to follow was never yours. You didn't ask for the map they gave you. You didn't create the rules you were told to obey. You didn't write the story they expect you to live. And now that you're seeing this for the first time, truly seeing it, your whole inner system is sounding an alarm. Not to warn you of danger, but to tell you that you're coming home. This is why the discomfort feels so heavy. It's not because something new is entering you, it's because something old is waking up within you. Something sacred, something ancient, something that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. It's why you suddenly feel overwhelmed in crowds, why you can no longer tolerate fake smiles and shallow conversation, why you crave silence, even though silence used to scare you. Because in that silence, something whispers to you, and you've heard it before. You just forgot where. You're not breaking, you're shedding. The roles, the masks, the layers, and as they fall away, the fear rises, not because it's the truth, but because it's the residue of forgetting. Most people spend their lives trying to escape this feeling. They run, they numb, they pretend, but not you. Because something inside you wouldn't let you ignore it anymore. That's why you found this message. That's why you couldn't sleep last night. That's why your body has been trying to tell you what your soul already knows. You've always known. You knew when you were a child, staring at the stars, wondering why it felt like home. You knew when you looked someone in the eyes and felt a connection that defied logic. You knew when the world told you one thing, but your heart whispered another. But you had to forget, just long enough to survive. And now that you've survived, it's time to remember. That sensation of fear creeping up your spine, that's your soul stretching its wings after years of being buried under expectations. That moment of panic when you realize nothing feels solid anymore, that's the foundation of lies beginning to crumble. You're not discovering the truth, you're reclaiming it. And that feeling you've been calling fear, it's just the light beginning to enter the room. There's a moment in every awakening when the lines between fear and recognition blur. It creeps in quietly, like a soft static beneath your thoughts. You start noticing small things, a strange look in someone's eyes, a sudden change in your reactions, the way certain places feel heavier than they used to. At first, you ignore it. You try to rationalize it. Maybe it's stress. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe you're making something out of nothing, but it keeps coming back. That feeling, that pull, that unmistakable tension in your chest. when you see something that doesn't sit right, not because it's new, but because it feels familiar in a way you can't explain. It's like recognizing a face in a dream you never had. This is what happens when your soul begins to speak louder than your programming. What you've been calling fear is really lucidity. It's the moment your consciousness catches up with your intuition. And when that happens, it's unsettling, because your mind was trained to fear what it doesn't control. But the truth doesn't ask for permission, it just arrived. Imagine living in a house your entire life, convinced every wall was solid. You leaned on them, trusted them, built your identity inside their boundary. And then one day, you knock on one, and it echoes, hollow, fragile, fake. It's not the echo that's dangerous, it's what it means. Because now you're faced with a terrifying possibility. If that wall wasn't real, what else isn't? If that rule was a lie, what else have I obeyed blindly? If that version of reality was just a construct, then who am I, really? This is where the true fear comes in, not from external threats, but from the collapse of internal certainty. You realize that much of what you believed wasn't based on truth, but on repetition, conditioning, survival. You didn't choose most of your beliefs. They were given to you, drip-fed through culture, religion, school, and silent, especially silent. No one ever told you the real reason you felt different, or why some things never sat right with you, even if everyone else accepted them. You were taught to suppress the questions, to push down the doubts, to label your sensitivity as weakness. But it was never weakness. It was awareness, waiting for the right time to break the surface. And now that it's rising, it feels like fear, because what's being threatened isn't you, but the false identity you had to wear to be safe. The version of you that complied, smiled, fit in. The version that knew how to survive, but not how to feel. That version is trembling. Because the soul is reclaiming space, you begin to notice how much of your life has been curated, filtered, edited, performed. How many truths you swallowed to avoid confrontation. How many times you betrayed your intuition for approval. This is why so many people stay asleep. Because waking up isn't comfortable. It's disruptive. It breaks routines. It dismantles relationships. It calls out everything that's been built on autopilot. But you didn't come here for comfort. And somewhere inside, you know that. You've always known. That's why the truth you're now sensing feels like both a threat and a homecoming. It doesn't knock politely. It rushes in like a flood, washing away all the fragile scaffolding you built to avoid being seen, really seen. And as that scaffolding crumbles, it leaves you exposed. But not in the way you feared. You're not weak without the mask. You're powerful in your rawness. You're alive in your awareness. You're becoming dangerous to everything that depends on your silence. Because when you stop fearing your own knowing, you become free. That's what this fear has been trying to hide from you all along. That you were never powerless. That you never needed to be told what was real. That your soul has always known the path, even when your mind couldn't see it. And now, the path is revealing itself. Not through maps, not through logic, but through resonance. You start to feel it in your gut when something is off, and you no longer ignore it. You feel a pull to certain people, places, words, and you follow without explanation. You stop needing to justify your discomfort. You start trusting that if something feels wrong, it probably is. This is how it begins, not with certainty, but with honesty, not with answers, but with the courage to ask better questions, not with control, but with surrender to something wiser than the ego. And slowly, the fear starts to change. It becomes less of a monster, more of a message, less of a panic, more of a pulse, the pulse of something ancient within you, something that isn't waking up, something that's always been awake, just waiting for you to remember. You thought you were afraid of the unknown, but what you're really afraid of is remembering. Because when you begin to remember, you can't go back to pretending. You can't go back to numbness. You can't go back to who you were before the cracks started showing. You start to see through things, not because you want to, but because your soul no longer lets you live blind. And once you've seen the illusion, it haunts you. You catch glimpses of it everywhere, in the way people force smiles while dying inside, in the hollow rituals of routines that were supposed to make life meaningful, in the way systems ask for obedience and offer no soul in return. But what's even more unsettling is when you start to realize that you participated in it all, not because you were evil, not because you were foolish, but because you had to forget in order to fit in. It wasn't your fault. The forgetting was necessary at the time. When you were a child, your body knew things your mind couldn't articulate. You picked up on the energy no one spoke of. You sensed tension in rooms where words were polite, but hearts were closed. You knew when people lied, even if they were lying to themselves, but you didn't have the language. You didn't have the safety to express it. So you learned to doubt it, to silence it, to abandon your knowing in favor of acceptance. That's what the world demanded of. Be agreeable, be useful, be small. They called it maturity. They called it growing up. They called it getting your head out of the clouds. But what they really meant was disconnect from the part of you that sees too clearly. And you did. For a while, you succeeded. You adapted. You colored within the line. You spoke when spoken to. You followed the rules you were never allowed to question. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You achieved what you were told would make you happy. And you waited for the satisfaction that never came. But the truth has a way of leaking in. A word here, a dream there, a heartbreak that shakes you awake, a silence that stretches longer than it should, until finally, one day, the shell begins to crack, not because you asked for it, but because something deeper remembered. It was time. The moment you feel that crack, something ancient stirs, something primal, something divine. And it doesn't show up like firework. It shows up like grief, like rage, like longing, like confusion. You feel disoriented because the map no longer works. The one you followed your entire life. The one that said, do this and you'll be safe. Be that and you'll be loved. But now you see the lie written in invisible ink. You feel the falseness behind the script, and it hurts. Because the illusion was comfortable. The illusion had clear rule. The illusion told you what to expect. And now you're floating between identities, between realities, between who you were and who you're becoming. This in-between is sacred, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like losing your grip, like shedding skin you thought was yours, like remembering a melody you can't quite sing, and yet it keeps playing in your dreams, in your discomfort, in your deep, aching need to feel something real. You're not imagining it. You're not making it up. You're remembering. And that memory doesn't come from a book, a guru, or a doctrine. It comes from your bone, your breath, your blood, from the part of you that existed before this world handed you a name and told you what to believe. It comes in waves, sudden, unexplainable moments of knowing. You'll be doing something ordinary, washing dishes, sitting in traffic, scrolling through your phone, and then something hits you, a realization, a sense, a knowing that pierces through everything. You can't explain it, but it's undeniable. You don't think it, you feel it. And for a brief second, everything makes sense, until it doesn't. Because the remembering isn't linear, it's not tidy, it's messy, and it often makes you feel like you're unraveling. But you're not unraveling. You're being rewoven, strand by strand, truth by truth, breath by breath. And though it feels like you're losing everything, you're actually being returned to what was always yours, your own inner compass, your forgotten wisdom, your untamed voice. You were never lost. You were just covered. Now the layers are falling away, and you're beginning to see not just the world differently, but yourself. And once that starts, nothing will ever look the same again. You start to look around and ask yourself, was the world always like this? Or am I just now seeing it? The answer is both. Yes, the world has always carried this weight, this contradiction, this strange blend of beauty and deceit. But no, you didn't always see it. You couldn't. You were shielded. You were trained to filter what you saw through the lens you were handed at birth. Culture, religion, education, family. They didn't just shape how you saw others. They shaped how you saw everything. But something has changed. The lens cracked. The story unraveled. The illusion is thinning, and your eyes can no longer unsee what's been revealed. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no single moment where everything clicks neatly into place. No voice from the clouds, no manual, no final answer that ties it all together. What happens instead is more haunting, a slow realization that you were living in a house of mirrors where every reflection was distorted to keep you from recognizing yourself. And now the glass is shattering. You begin to question everything, not from a place of rebellion, but from a place of deep, quiet recognition. Something about the news doesn't sit right. The rules don't make sense. The people in power seem less powerful and more desperate. The stories you believe about success, about safety, about being a good person begin to sound hollow. It's like waking up in a theater during the middle of a play and realizing you've memorized your line, but don't remember why you're on stage. This is the moment most people retreat. They feel the cognitive dissonance, the spiritual vertigo, and they panic. It's easier to plug back into the program than to dismantle it. Easier to scroll, to distract, to numb, to pretend. But if you're still here, it means you didn't retreat. It means you leaned into the discomfort, you faced the distortion, you dared to sit in the unease long enough for the clarity to emerge. And clarity, when it finally arrives, is rarely what we expect. Clarity is brutal. Clarity is kind. Clarity doesn't care about your comfort. It cares about your liberation. You see now that the world isn't falling apart. It's revealing itself. And that's far more terrifying, because if things are collapsing, we can wait for them to be rebuilt. We can hope for change. But if they're simply being exposed, then we must ask a harder question. What have we been participating in without knowing it? You begin to notice how much of your energy was invested in maintaining appearances, how many truths you ignored to avoid discomfort, how many times you swallowed your voice because it was easier to be agreeable than to be authentic. The system wasn't just around you, it was in you. It lived in your habits, your relationships, your thoughts, your idea of love. And now, every part of it is being re-evaluated. Not because you're becoming cynical, but because you're becoming conscious. You see how deeply you were shaped to trust authority, even when it didn't earn your trust. You see how often you questioned yourself instead of questioning the narrative. How often you blamed your sensitivity instead of honoring your intuition. And it shakes you, because you realize you weren't asleep by accident. You were taught to sleep. You were praised for it, rewarded for it, loved for it. But that love had conditions. It depended on your silence, your compliance, your amnesia. Now that the fog is lifting, you can no longer meet those conditions. You can't keep playing a role that no longer fits. You can't force yourself to believe what your soul has already outgrown. And so, everything starts to shift. Your friendships feel different. You crave depth, truth, slowness, and you start to notice how few people are comfortable with that. You find yourself walking away from conversations that once felt normal. You become less patient with superficiality and more drawn to solitude, to nature, to music that moves you in ways you can't explain. You start remembering things you never consciously learned. You hear phrases in your own voice that feel older than this lifetime. You have dreams that feel like messages. You sense presences you used to ignore because your perception is expanding. Your senses are sharpening. You no longer just see, you perceive. You no longer just hear, you discern. And this shift doesn't just change your spiritual experience. It changes everything. How you speak, how you love, how you walk through the world. You stop looking for validation in places that once fed you. You stop measuring your worth by how easy you are to digest. You stop fearing your intensity, and instead, you honor it as sacred fire. And still, part of you wonders, if I've been asleep all this time, what else have I forgotten? Oh, ChatGPT, Dees, it's not that you're learning something new. It's that you're finally remembering what you always knew, but had to forget to survive. And that's the part that breaks your heart the most. Realizing you once carried a truth so clear, so sacred, and so natural, but life taught you to doubt it. You trusted your inner voice as a child. You listened to what couldn't be explained. You knew who you were before the world told you who you had to be. But the forgetting wasn't failure, it was protection. You forgot in order to be accepted. You disconnected so you could stay safe. You buried parts of yourself because there was no one strong enough to hold them with you. The remembering, however, doesn't ask for permission. It returns like a flood, not to punish you, but to bring you home. You start to see it in the simplest moments. You'll be folding laundry and suddenly feel overwhelmed by a deep knowing you can't put into words. You'll hear a stranger's laugh, and it'll unlock a memory you never knew you had. You'll read a sentence, and something ancient in you whispers, "Yes, that's it. This isn't magic. This is memory, soul memory, timeless memory. Memory that doesn't come from your brain, it comes from your being. And when it returns, you begin to grieve. You grieve the years you spent silencing your intuition to fit in. You grieve the parts of yourself that you exiled to feel loved. You grieve the friendships you maintained just to avoid being alone. You grieve the dreams you put on hold because someone else said they were unrealistic. But hidden inside that grief is gold. Because in mourning what you lost, you begin to reconnect with what never left, the truth, the wisdom, the clarity that lived in your bones all along. You didn't lose it. It was simply waiting for you to remember. You remember that you are not your wounds. You are not your trauma. You are not your story. You are not your performance. You are the one who watched it all, silently, patiently, waiting for the day you'd awaken to yourself. And that day is here. It doesn't mean life gets easy. It doesn't mean you suddenly have all the answers, but it means you finally stop pretending you don't know. You stop outsourcing your truth. You stop following maps written by people who never asked where you were going. You no longer need to be led, because the compass is back in your hand, and it doesn't point north, it points inward. You find yourself doing strange things now, waking up at odd hours with a sense that something wants to speak to you, writing down words that come out of nowhere, crying for no clear reason, but knowing it's not sadness, it's release, it's remembrance, it's soul residue rising to the surface. And even though this journey is solitary, you're not alone, because once you start remembering, you begin to notice others who are remembering too. You recognize it in their eyes, in the way they pause before speaking, as if translating energy into language, in the way they don't look away when things get deep, in the way they no longer have interest in performing normal. These are your people, not because you share the same opinions or lifestyles, but because you share the same ache, the same pull, the same sacred unraveling. You begin to understand that remembering is a kind of returning, not to a place, but to a state of being, a state where nothing needs to be forced, where intuition leads, where silence speaks, where truth doesn't need explanation, only recognition. You remember what it felt like to trust yourself before someone taught you not to. You remember what it felt like to love without shrinking. You remember what it felt like to be without apologizing. This is what's underneath the fear, not danger, not darkness, not madness, but truth, your truth. The fear was just the final guard at the gate, the last illusion designed to keep you from remembering who you've always been. And now that you've walked through it, everything begins to shift. The world doesn't change. You do. You don't see more. You see clearer. You don't have more answers, but you trust the questions. You don't feel safer, but you feel truer. You begin to walk differently, not with certainty, but with sovereignty, not with a plan, but with presence, not with armor, but with awareness. And this is the real miracle. Not that you've changed, but that you've come back to the self that never needed fixing, back to the truth that never needed proving, back to the soul that never stopped speaking. You don't need to search anymore. You don't need to chase the next answer, the next sign, the next escape, because now you remember. And remembering is the beginning of everything. If this spoke to you in a way you can't explain, tell me in the comment. Let your voice be a mirror for someone else who's just now waking up. And before you leave, there's another piece waiting for you in the next video. One more step down the path of your remembering. Click it. Your soul already knows.